My sister-in-law tried to steal my life, but I turned it around. For a long time, I thought my life was exactly as it should be. A peaceful home, 2 healthy children, a present husband, and a relatively close-knit family. That's what I showed the world, and that's how I believed I was living. I was Valeria, a married woman, a literature teacher, a devoted mother, a loving daughter, and everything was fine. At least, that's what I thought. I woke up early, made coffee, took the kids to school, graded tests, and returned home with a peaceful heart. I was proud of my routine. There was a certain poetry in the simplicity of my daily life, but not all poetry is made of light. Some conceal silences, others conceal monsters. And so, little by little, my life began to unravel. Not with a bang, but with whispers. I didn't know it yet, but the woman I admired most, whom I considered part of my own blood, was engineering my downfall. Her name was Clara, my sister-in-law. Claudio's sister, the image of perfection, but nothing about her was what it seemed. At the time, I was 38 years old. I'd been married to Claudio for almost 15. We met in college, and he was always my rock. He was calm, affectionate, and had a sense of justice that enchanted me. Clara, his sister, was the star of the family. A doctor, beautiful, articulate, and extremely polite. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately drew everyone's attention. She was a widow, mother of 2, and for many years, I thought she carried a silent pain. The truth is, Clara was great at playing roles, and I was a naive spectator for too long. I didn't notice the signs, or maybe I ignored them for fear of admitting something was wrong. Sometimes we prefer to keep up appearances rather than face reality, especially when reality begins to show cracks in those we've always trusted. It was as if I were living inside a play, and only much later did I understand that the protagonist wasn't me, it was her. It all started with small things. Subtle comments, sidelong glances, compliments disguised as criticism. Clara had a knack for saying something offensive with a smile on her face, and when I mentioned it to Claudio, he'd change the subject. "You're exaggerating," he'd say. "She just wants to help." And I believed him. Or rather, I wanted to believe him, because admitting something was off meant challenging everything I thought was solid. It was at a Sunday, lunch at my mother-in-law's house, that I felt my first real discomfort. Claire was talking about my oldest son, Gabriel's, school performance. She said perhaps he was struggling because his mother, while great, seemed very distracted lately. Everyone laughed politely, except me. I remained silent, swallowing hard. That got to me. I started paying more attention. Clara gave her opinion on everything. My way of dressing, my diet, my way of speaking, but always with that layer of sweetness. Seemingly harmless. It was a slow poison, and I was being poisoned. Things got worse when she started getting closer to my children. At first, I thought it was great. After all, it was good for them to have a caring figure around. But soon I began to notice something strange about the way she presented herself. She made a point of showing off that she was the favorite aunt, buying expensive gifts, taking the boys on outings without consulting me. I began to feel like a supporting character in my own children's lives. When I tried to talk to Claudio, he downplayed it once again. "She's just trying to help, Valeria. After what she went through with her husband, maybe she's trying to fill a void." I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe it was all just a misunderstanding. But the feeling of being excluded from my own family grew with each passing day. It was as if Clara was building an emotional empire within my home, and I was the only one who didn't see the walls going up. The worst part was the isolation. Little by little, I began to notice that even my friends were distancing themselves. Nusa, my childhood friend, was one of the only ones who realized what was happening. She said Clara was dangerous, that I needed to open my eyes. But I was so immersed in doubt, so surrounded by voices that denied my perception, that I began to doubt my own sanity. Manipulation is a silent thing. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And when you start to question whether the problem isn't you, it's because you're already being corroded from within. Clara knew exactly where to push. She wasn't violent, she wasn't aggressive, she was refined. And that made it all the more difficult to prove. She seemed solicitous, helpful, loving. But behind the facade, there was control. There was a strategy. And I was on the front lines of the battlefield, unaware that a war was taking place. That's when my mother, Raquel, began to notice my dejection. She called me over, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Daughter, you're disappearing. What's happening to you?" That broke me. I cried for the first time in a long time. I cried for real, with my whole body. I said I felt lost, displaced, as if someone were slowly erasing who I was. My mother didn't need many words to understand. Raquel has always had a sharp intuition, and she, along with Nuza, began to help me pick up the pieces. It was with their support that I began to write down, observe, and gather silent evidence of everything Clara did. I needed to understand. I needed to see clearly. Because at that point, my mind was already confused. Psychological manipulation is treacherous. And the more I dug, the more I realized I was facing something much bigger than I imagined. I discovered that Clara had access to my emails. She read my messages, impersonating me to talk to teachers at my children's school. Once, I found an exchange of messages between her and one of the mothers of one of Gabriel's classmates, in which Clara spoke of me as if I were myself. Disorganized, unstable, very emotional. I read it and felt the floor drop. This was no longer just interference. It was an invasion, a direct attack on my identity. I went to confront Claudio, but he, once again, tried to justify himself. Clara wouldn't do that. It must have been a misunderstanding. You must be seeing things. That day, I slept in the boys' room. I could no longer look at the man beside me. For the first time, I began to think about leaving with my children, but I still didn't have the courage. I still wanted to believe I could fix it, that I could restore what had been corrupted. It was then that Cesar, Clara's oldest son, came to me. He was 18 and had lived with his mother since he was little. He was a reserved, polite boy, and I'd always had a special affection for him. When he showed up at my house, he said he needed to talk. He was pale and nervous, and then he said, "Auntie, I think my mother isn't well. She's been doing strange things, hiding things, going through other people's phones, and she said horrible things about you to me and my brother." My heart raced. Cesar had nothing to gain by telling me this. And that was what finally broke the wall of illusion that still held me captive. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't exaggerating. It was real, and it was happening right under my nose. That night, I lay awake for hours. I reviewed my entire life with Clara. Every conversation, every encounter, every little comment. It was as if a fog began to lift. I saw, with cruel clarity, every moment she had reduced me, controlled me, weakened me. I began to write. I wrote everything down. I compiled a dossier. I talked to Raquel, Nuza, Cesar. I put together a puzzle that painted the full picture of her manipulation. And then, finally, I took it all to Claudio. He read it in silence. He looked at the messages, the evidence, the recordings. I saw his face pale. I saw his expression change. For the first time, he couldn't deny it. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt like I had my own voice. Claudio was shocked. He said he needed time to process it. I understood. After all, it wasn't easy to accept that his own sister was behind so much suffering. He was away for a few days. He went to his mother's house. I stayed with the boys. I used that time to organize everything I could. I spoke to a lawyer, secured my networks, my accounts, my routine. Clara didn't know yet that I had discovered everything, and that gave me an advantage. But I was exhausted, psychologically destroyed. Each step was like walking with a heavy body, with a torn soul. Still, I kept going, because now I knew it was no longer a matter of coexistence. It was a matter of emotional survival. I needed to protect myself, protect my children, and rebuild myself. When Claudio returned, he was different, quieter, more present. He said he had confronted Clara, that she denied everything, of course, but couldn't explain the evidence. He cried. He said he felt guilty for not seeing it sooner, for leaving me alone. And then I realized he was a victim too, manipulated by his sister since childhood, conditioned to protect her, to defend her, to ignore her flaws. Clara was a master at manipulating guilt, but now, the mask had fallen, and with it, all the certainties of that family. The news began to spread. Other family members approached me. Some apologized for not believing them before. Others still defended Clara. They said she was going through a difficult time and deserved understanding. I heard it all, but this time, I didn't remain silent. I said that understanding isn't synonymous with acceptance, that protecting someone who harms them is perpetuating the damage. And for the first time, I felt my voice carried weight, that my words weren't just an empty cry. Clara tried to get closer. She called me. She texted me. She asked to talk. She said it was all a misunderstanding, that she loved me, that she did everything for the good of the family. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I understood that certain relationships are only maintained through silence. And I was no longer that silenced woman. I wanted peace, and she wasn't a part of that. It was difficult, very difficult. I went through moments of anguish, panic attacks, days when I could barely get out of bed. I feared losing my marriage, my sanity, my identity. But each morning I decided to keep going. I regained a piece of myself, a piece that Clara had tried to erase. And that, however small, was a victory. One more brick in the reconstruction of my life. Over time, I began to come back to myself. I started writing poetry again. I started laughing with my children again. I started looking in the mirror and recognizing myself again. The wound was still open, but it was no longer bleeding. It was a scar forming. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. Not a survivor, but a woman in the process of rebirth. And that, in itself, was a form of freedom. After everything, I decided to go to therapy. I had never allowed myself to take care of myself before. I always thought I could handle it alone, that it was enough to talk to friends or write in a notebook. But the pain was too deep to be digested in silence. In the first session, I could barely say anything. I just cried. The psychologist looked at me with a warmth I hadn't remembered feeling in a long time. It was as if, for the first time, someone saw me without judging me, without questioning me. I began attending weekly, and there, in that safe space, I began to organize my inner chaos. I understood how Clara had altered my perception of reality, how she had shaped situations to make me doubt myself. I also understood that there was something inside me that allowed this, the fear of displeasing, the desire to be accepted, to always be kind, and that this wasn't weakness, it was simply a reflection of old wounds. The pain, little by little, became strength. Not a noisy strength, but a firm one. Silent. Mine. My children, as young as they were, felt it too. They were quieter, more suspicious. I had to talk to them carefully, explaining without putting too much pressure on them. I told them that Aunt Clara needed help, that some of her actions weren't right, but that the most important thing was that we were together. I also took them to therapy. I wanted them to have the tools to deal with everything they saw and felt. Gabriel, who was previously more outgoing, took a while to return to his former self. Lucas, younger, would ask me if his aunt still picked him up from school. It was in these small questions that I saw the profound impact of that experience. And it hurt, but at the same time it gave me the strength to move forward. I needed to be an example of courage and truth for them, and even without having all the answers, I could show them that starting over was possible. Claudio changed. Not overnight, but he did. He began to participate more in household decisions, to listen to me with genuine attention, not selective listening. He apologized several times, and while not all of them healed the wounds immediately, they demonstrated an effort to rebuild. He also began therapy, alone. He said he wanted to understand why he was always so protective of his sister, why it took him so long to listen to me. I respected his process, but I made it clear that this time, I wouldn't settle for less than I deserved. I didn't want a marriage of appearances. I wanted partnership. I wanted a home where I could be who I am without fear of being diminished. And, little by little, we found ourselves again. Not as before, but in a new way, more genuine. Clara lost whatever control she had, and when that control vanished, everything fell apart. Her ex-husband, who until then had been an absent figure, filed for custody review. The family began questioning her, and some old truths came to light. Hidden debts, lies about work, manipulations with other relatives. Everything came flooding back. And then came the worst. Clara was accused of fraudulent misrepresentation. Remember the emails she sent pretending to be me? Yes. Yes. One of them involved a false report about my son's school. And when this reached the principal, the police were called. I never wanted revenge, but justice sometimes comes without us asking for it. And in this case, it did. When Clara was arrested, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. It was the end of a sickening cycle, but it was also the definitive downfall of a person I had once loved. Because yes, I loved Clara like a sister, And accepting that this love had been manipulated, used against me, was one of the hardest pains to swallow. I visited her in prison once, just once. She was dejected, but still tried to control the narrative. She said everything had been misinterpreted, that she loved me. I listened, silently. And when she finished, she simply said, "You lost me. But more than that, you lost yourself." I left with a peaceful heart. For the first time, I felt that chapter was truly closed. From then on, life began to take a new direction. It wasn't easy. There was still distrust. There was still pain. But there was also room for new things. I grew even closer to my mother, Nusa, and the few people who stood by me. I made new friends. I returned to teaching with greater passion. I began giving talks on toxic relationships and emotional manipulation. I discovered that my story could help others, and that gave me purpose. It gave meaning to what I had experienced. Transforming pain into learning is one of the most profound forms of overcoming, and I was living it. I started paying more attention to the signs, respecting my intuition. Today, I trust what I feel. If something seems wrong, I don't swallow it anymore. I question, investigate, and take a stand. And I teach this to my children. I want them to grow up knowing that their voice matters, that their instincts are valid. The best legacy I can leave them is this: awareness, autonomy, courage. I still dream about Clara sometimes. Sometimes it's a nightmare. Sometimes it's just a distorted memory. But I no longer wake up afraid. I wake up with a strange kind of compassion. Not the compassion that excuses, but the kind that understands that there are people so hurt that they only know how to hurt, and that it has nothing to do with us. Understanding this freed me from carrying guilt that wasn't mine. I never imagined I'd go through something like this. When I look back, I see a woman who was fading away without realizing it. Today, I see a whole woman. With scars, yes, but also with strength. Overcoming this didn't happen overnight. It came from each small step, from each choice to continue even without certainty. And that's what I want to say to anyone reading this now. Don't expect a miracle. Start with what you have. Start however you can. But don't let yourself be silenced. Don't accept what destroys you just because it comes wrapped in affection. Today, I'm fine. Not perfect, but fine. I still have difficult days, like everyone else. But now I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. And I know I no longer need to mold myself to fit into spaces that don't want me whole. That, for me, is the greatest victory. Having found myself again. Having rebuilt my life without having to erase what I experienced. Because the pain was part of it, but it's not all I am. I am much more than that. Writing this story was a challenge. It reopened wounds. It recalled difficult moments. But it was also an act of healing. Because each written word is also a way of releasing what was once trapped inside me. And by sharing this here, with you, the reader, I feel something complete. That my story is no longer kept as a heavy secret, but transformed into something useful. Something that can touch other lives. If you're going through something similar, I want you to know, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not exaggerating. What you feel matters. What you perceive matters. And you deserve to live a life where you can breathe in peace. Don't settle for anything less. Don't settle for relationships that diminish you. Seek support. Talk to someone. Write. Scream if necessary. But don't silence your pain. It took me a long time to understand that I deserved respect. That I deserved to be heard. But once I did, I never looked back. Clara destroyed me in many ways, but it was by trying to erase me that she showed me my light. Today, I shine for myself, not to please anyone, not to be accepted, but because it's my right to exist fully, and no one will steal that from me anymore. This story doesn't have a magical ending. Clara remains trapped. My family is still rebuilding, and I'm constantly rebuilding. But what's changed is that now I walk with awareness, with firmness, and with self-love. I no longer depend on the approval of those who don't truly love me, and this has given me a freedom I never knew existed. If you've read this far, thank you. Truly. May this story inspire you to look at your own life with more care and courage. May it serve as a reminder that even in the darkest of environments, we can shine a light. I am Valeria, and I survived. Not only that, I was reborn, and if I could do it, so can you. Don't give up on yourself.